The ranger's flashlight beam cut through the morning mist like a knife through gauze. What it revealed made him stop cold in the middle of the trail. 23 tents stood in perfect formation across the clearing at Whispering Pines Campground. Coolers sat unopened beside fire rings where embers still glowed faintly, releasing thin ribbons of smoke into the August air. A Coleman lantern hissed softly near the communal area, its propane tank still half full. Someone's coffee pot sat on a camp stove, the liquid inside stone cold but recently brewed. Everything was there. Everything except the people. Ranger Michael Torres moved slowly through the scene, his boots crunching on the gravel path. A child's stuffed bear lay face down in the dirt. Playing cards were scattered across a picnic table, a poker game abandoned mid-hand. Car keys dangled from ignitions. Wallets bulged inside unzipped bags. A woman's glasses sat folded on a camp chair, as if she'd meant to return in just a moment. But no one had returned. Not in the 3 hours since the first 911 call. Not as the sun climbed higher over the Cascade Mountains. Not as the state police arrived. Then the FBI. Then specialists whose agencies didn't advertise their names. 67 people had checked into Whispering Pines Campground between August 15th and 17th, 1985. Families with children, retirees in RVs, a youth hiking group from Portland, college friends on a final summer adventure. By the morning of August 18th, every single one of them had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a scene so undisturbed it looked like they'd simply evaporated mid-breath. This is the story of what happened at Whispering Pines, and why, nearly 40 years later, we still don't have all the answers. If you're fascinated by unsolved mysteries that defy explanation, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what we've uncovered. August in the Pacific Northwest offered a brief window of paradise between the soggy spring and the coming autumn rains. The summer of 1985 had been particularly glorious, week after week of crystalline blue skies, temperatures in the comfortable 70s, and air so clean it seemed to polish the distant mountain peaks to an impossible brightness. Whispering Pines Campground, nestled in a valley 30 miles east of Portland, Oregon, was the kind of place that appeared on postcards. Established in 1947, it sprawled across 40 acres of old-growth forest, where Douglas firs towered like cathedral columns, and a clear creek burbled through the eastern edge of the property. The Forest Service maintained it meticulously: clean vault toilets, well-marked trails, fire rings positioned at safe distances, and a gravel road that wound through the camping areas like a gentle serpent. The campground could accommodate about 70 people comfortably across 25 designated sites. It wasn't the largest facility in the region, but it was beloved by locals and Portland families who appreciated its proximity to the city, combined with its genuine sense of wilderness immersion. Cell phone towers didn't exist yet. The nearest payphone was at a general store 7 miles down the mountain. When you went to Whispering Pines, you truly unplugged. Friday, August 15th, saw the first arrivals. The Cordova family from Beaverton pulled their Winnebago into sight 7 just after noon. Miguel and Rosa Cordova had been coming to Whispering Pines for over a decade, bringing their 3 children for one last camping trip before school started. Their daughter, Patricia, was 16 and less than thrilled about the forced family fun, but even she had to admit the place had a certain magic. By evening, the Morrison clan had claimed the prime spot near the creek, Site 12, which offered both proximity to water and a natural sound barrier from the other campers. James Morrison, a high school chemistry teacher, had organized what he called the extended family extravaganza: his own wife and 2 kids, his brother's family from Seattle, and his elderly parents who'd driven down from Olympia in their modest RV. 11 people total, spanning 3 generations, all gathering for what James insisted would be a weekend to remember. Saturday brought the youth group. 17 teenagers from Christ the King Church in Portland arrived in a convoy of cars, hauling tents and backpacks and enough energy to power a small city. Their chaperones, youth pastor David Chen and volunteer coordinator Sarah Wickham, had been planning this trip for months. It was meant to be a bonding experience, a chance to disconnect from the distractions of suburban life and reconnect with nature and faith. The kids set up camp in the group area on the campground's western edge, their laughter echoing through the trees as they struggled with tent poles and argued over who'd forgotten the extra stakes. Other campers filtered in throughout Saturday. There were the Kowalskis, newlyweds from Eugene on their first camping trip together, the Henderson brothers, 3 men in their 60s who'd been fishing these mountains since they were boys and made the pilgrimage every August, without fail. A group of Portland State University students celebrating their graduation. A solo hiker named Thomas Bridger, who'd registered for Site 22, the most isolated spot in the campground, because he claimed he needed to think through some things in solitude. By Saturday evening, nearly every site was occupied, the forest filled with the comfortable sounds of human habitation, the zip of tent flaps, the clatter of cooking gear, children's voices calling to each other as they explored the trails, the snap and pop of campfires being coaxed to life. Someone had brought a portable radio, and for a while, soft classic rock drifted through the trees until the signal faded as the sun set behind the mountains. Ranger Michael Torres made his evening rounds at 8 o'clock, driving slowly through the campground in his Forest Service truck. Everything appeared exactly as it should. Families gathered around fire rings, teenagers roasted marshmallows and told stories designed to frighten each other. The Henderson brothers had already caught their limit of trout and were frying them in cast iron skillets that made everyone downwind intensely jealous. Torres stopped at Site 12, where James Morrison was struggling with a propane connection on his camp stove. They chatted briefly about the weather forecast, clear skies predicted through Tuesday, and Morrison mentioned he was planning a sunrise hike the next morning to a viewpoint about 2 miles up the mountain. Seemed like everyone had plans. The youth group intended to do a day hike to Mirror Lake. The Cordova kids wanted to explore the old logging road that dead-ended a mile north. Perfect late summer plans for perfect late summer weather. Torres finished his rounds by 9:30. He noted in his logbook that all campers seemed settled. No complaints, no concerns. The campground was at approximately 90% capacity. Estimated occupancy, 67 people. The night was calm, temperature dropping into the comfortable 50s. A light breeze stirred the treetops, making the signature whispering sound that gave the place its name. Everything was absolutely, completely normal. The kind of peaceful summer night that people remembered fondly for years afterward. The kind that made them want to return again and again to this particular patch of forest where the modern world felt very far away. It was the last time anyone would see Whispering Pines Campground as anything other than a crime scene. Dawn broke at 6:14 a.m. on Sunday, August 18th. The sun crested the eastern ridge, sending long spears of golden light through the trees and burning away the thin layer of mist that had settled in the valley overnight. It should have been accompanied by the usual morning sounds of a busy campground. Tent zippers, coughing camp stoves, children complaining about the cold, adults stumbling toward the bathroom facilities while clutching coffee mugs like lifelines. Instead, there was only silence. At 7:32 a.m., a logger named Carl Dietrich drove past the campground entrance on his way to a cutting site farther up the mountain. He noticed the silence too, though he didn't think much of it at the time. City people, he figured, sleeping in on vacation. He'd learned long ago not to judge how others spent their leisure time, even if it meant wasting the best part of the day when the forest was freshest and the wildlife most active. The first real alarm came at 8:15 a.m., but it didn't come from inside the campground at all. Margaret Morrison, James Morrison's elderly mother, had a strict medication schedule. Her heart condition required precise timing with her pills, and she'd brought everything she needed for the weekend in a small organizer marked with days and times, but she'd forgotten one crucial item: her blood pressure medication, a different prescription that she kept in a separate bottle at home. By Sunday morning, she realized the oversight. The nearest pharmacy was back in Olympia, a 4-hour round trip. James, ever the dutiful son, had insisted on driving back to his parents' house Saturday evening to retrieve it. He'd left around 7:30, promising to return first thing Sunday morning with the medication and the fresh pastries from his mother's favorite bakery as a bonus. When James pulled his Subaru wagon back into the campground's entrance at 8:15 a.m., he was singing along to Bruce Springsteen on the tape deck, a white bakery box on the passenger seat, his mother's pills in his shirt pocket. He was thinking about how grateful she'd be, how this act of thoughtfulness might earn him some goodwill that would carry through the inevitable family disagreements that cropped up whenever too many Morrisons occupied the same space for too long. He was not thinking about what he would find. The first thing he noticed was the absolute stillness. No smoke from fire rings, no movement among the tents and RVs, no children darting between campsites or adults making breakfast. Just silence. So complete it felt like a physical presence. James drove slowly toward Site 12, a prickle of unease climbing his spine. Maybe everyone had gone on a morning hike together. Maybe there had been some organized activity he'd missed, but even as he thought it, he knew it didn't make sense. You don't evacuate an entire campground before 9 a.m. on a Sunday, leaving everything behind. He parked near his family's campsite and got out. The scene was surreal in its ordinary horror. His brother's tent stood exactly where they'd pitched it. Door flapped open slightly, revealing rumpled sleeping bags inside. His father's RV was closed up, the little Dutch door still latched. The camp chairs were arranged around a cold fire ring where they'd gathered the night before. His son's bicycle lay on its side in the dirt, right where the kid had dropped it before bed. "Hello," James called. His voice seemed to be absorbed by the trees, deadened somehow. Amy, Dad, anyone. Nothing. He walked through the campsite, his unease blossoming into real fear. His wife's jacket was draped over a chair. His daughter's book, she'd been reading Stephen King's It, which seemed grotesquely appropriate now, lay open and face down on the picnic table. His father's fishing gear was neatly organized near the RV's entrance, clearly being prepared for a morning expedition that never happened. James started jogging through the campground, calling names. At the Cordova site, he found the same eerie tableau, presence without people. The Winnebago was locked, but peering through the windows revealed clothes laid out on the dinette as if someone had been planning their outfit for the day. A breakfast casserole sat in a Dutch oven on the picnic table, clearly prepared the night before to be cooked in the morning coals, now covered with a thin layer of dew. The youth group's area was perhaps the most disturbing. 17 tents in neat rows, most still zipped closed, some open with sleeping bags visible inside. A large cooler stood beside the communal fire ring, unopened. Someone had hung a banner between two trees. Christ the King Youth Group, 1985. Building Faith in the Wilderness. It twisted slowly in the morning breeze. James found himself running now, moving from site to site with increasing desperation. The Kowalski newlyweds, tent empty. Their wedding photo in a waterproof frame sitting on a log beside the fire ring. The Henderson brothers, 3 sleeping bags in one large tent, 3 fishing rods propped against a tree, 3 pairs of boots lined up outside the tent flap like soldiers at attention. Every single site was the same. Evidence of habitation, but no inhabitants. Like everyone had simply dissolved into mist. At 8:47 a.m., James Morrison reached the ranger station, a small wooden building near the entrance, and found it empty as well. The door was unlocked, which wasn't unusual during peak season, but Ranger Torres's logbook lay open on the desk to his notes from the previous evening. A half-empty coffee mug sat beside it, the contents stone cold. The two-way radio mounted on the wall crackled with distant chatter from other Forest Service facilities, a reminder that the rest of the world was going on normally, while this one pocket of reality had somehow come unmoored. James grabbed the radio handset with shaking fingers and pressed the talk button. I'm at Whispering Pines Campground. I need help. Everyone's gone. Everyone's just Gone. The voice that responded was calm and professional, accustomed to dealing with wilderness emergencies, lost hikers, medical incidents, the occasional bear encounter. But nothing in the dispatcher's training manual had prepared her for what James Morrison was trying to explain. By 9:30 a.m., 2 Oregon State Police cruisers were screaming up the mountain road, sirens cutting through the forest silence. By 10 o'clock, a dozen more officers had arrived, along with 2 ambulances on standby and a Forest Service supervisor who kept radiating questions to higher authorities, his voice increasingly strained as he tried to explain the situation without sounding insane. By noon, the FBI had been notified. By 2 p.m., they had agents on scene. By sunset, Whispering Pines Campground had become the center of one of the most perplexing missing persons investigations in American history. 66 people had vanished. Every single one of them except James Morrison, who'd been saved by his mother's forgotten medication and a 4-hour drive to Olympia. Special Agent Elizabeth Harrow arrived Monday morning with a team of 6 agents and a growing sense that this case would define or destroy her career. At 34, she was young for a senior investigator position, but she'd earned her reputation handling complex kidnapping cases with methodical analysis and intuitive leaps that colleagues found either brilliant or reckless. Nothing in her experience had prepared her for this. The FBI established a command post near the campground entrance. Harrow spent her first 6 hours simply walking the site, taking in every detail. She didn't touch anything. She just looked. What she saw was a tableau of interrupted normalcy, so complete it defied rational explanation. This wasn't a mass kidnapping. You can't kidnap 66 people simultaneously without leaving traces of struggle. This wasn't a cult suicide. Bodies would be present. This wasn't a planned disappearance. People had left behind medications, money, identification. Everything needed to function in modern society. Crime scene technicians began meticulous documentation. Every tent photographed from multiple angles. Every personal item cataloged. Fingerprints lifted, though this proved futile given 66 people had been living here, leaving prints on everything. Agent Paul Brennan, a former wilderness rescue coordinator, made a disturbing observation on the second day. "The sleeping bags," he said, pointing to a tent in the youth group area. "Look at how they're arranged." Harrow ducked inside. 2 sleeping bags lay side by side, both with zippers partially down, both still holding the approximate shape of human forms, as if someone had been lying in them and then somehow been extracted vertically without disturbing the material. They found the same pattern in tent after tent, sleeping bags that looked occupied but empty, camping chairs with indentations suggesting recent use, a volleyball in the middle of the communal area as if someone had been about to serve it. The timeline proved frustratingly narrow. Torres had completed his rounds at 9:30 p.m. Saturday, noting everything normal. That gave roughly 11 hours for whatever happened to have occurred. Search dogs arrived Tuesday. This was standard procedure. The dogs would pick up scent trails and potentially lead searchers to the missing people. The dogs went insane. Not aggressively, but in confusion. They'd pick up scents at campsites, follow them in widening circles, then simply stop, whining and pawing at the ground as if the trail had hit an invisible wall. One German shepherd named Max followed a scent trail 50 yards into the forest, then sat down and refused to move, howling mournfully until his handler led him away. The dog handlers had never seen anything like it. Scent trails don't just stop. They fade, they get confused by water or weather, but they don't hit an invisible boundary and cease to exist. By Wednesday, the media arrived in force. The story exploded. Mass disappearance in Oregon. 66 vanished from campground. Bizarre vanishing baffles FBI. Theories poured in. UFO abductions. Rapture. Government experiments. Mass kidnapping. Harrow ignored the noise and focused on facts. She established working groups. Victimology. Physical evidence. Timeline reconstruction. Area analysis. The victimology team found no meaningful connections. The missing included people from different cities, backgrounds, ages from toddlers to retirees. The only commonality was being at Whispering Pines that weekend. The physical evidence team made one interesting discovery. Several campfires showed evidence of having been built up shortly before everyone vanished. Fresh wood added to fires that should have been banking down for the night. It suggested something had drawn people from their tents in the late evening or early morning, something that made them want light and warmth. Thursday, a week after the disappearance, they brought in a cadaver dog. It found nothing. No human remains, no evidence of death. 66 people had simply ceased to exist. By the end of the second week, the FBI had conducted over 300 interviews, collected thousands of items of potential evidence, and generated millions in investigative costs. They had precisely 0 viable suspects and 0 promising leads. The case was becoming the Bureau's worst nightmare, a mystery without even a theory, let alone a solution. While the FBI pursued evidence, 66 families were slowly being destroyed by uncertainty. Sarah Cordova, Patricia's younger sister who'd stayed home that weekend due to a summer cold, found herself living in a house that felt like a mausoleum. Her parents had taken the Winnebago. Her older brother Carlos and sister Patricia had gone. Her aunt and uncle had driven separately and were also missing. 9 members of her extended family had vanished. And at 14, she was suddenly being shuttled between distant relatives while lawyers tried to figure out guardianship. The worst part wasn't the loss itself, though that was crushing, but the complete absence of closure. Were they dead? Were they suffering somewhere? Every scenario her mind constructed was both impossible and terrifying. David Chen's wife, Jennifer, appeared at the command post every single day for the first month, asking the same questions, receiving the same non-answers. David had been responsible for 17 teenagers from the congregation. She oscillated between hope and despair hourly, never able to settle into either reality. The church itself was gutted. 17 teenagers gone meant 17 families in agony. Some found their faith strengthened by crisis. Others found it shattered. How could a just God allow such incomprehensible suffering to young people on a youth group trip? James Morrison shouldered a burden of survivor's guilt so massive it threatened to crush him. His wife Amy, his children, his brother's family, his elderly parents, all gone because he'd driven back to Olympia. If he'd stayed, he'd be missing too. But would his presence have somehow prevented whatever happened? Or would he simply be another missing person? The FBI assigned a family liaison team, but it was an impossible job. How do you tell 66 families you have no information, no leads, no hope to offer? Some families hired private investigators. These PIs descended on Whispering Pines, conducting their own interviews, searching the forests, developing theories from plausible to bizarre. None found anything useful. Psychics called the FBI hotline by the hundreds. Against her better judgment, Harrow actually met with 3 highly recommended ones. One claimed to see a wall of light. Another described a doorway opening between worlds. The third simply touched items from the scene and wept, saying she felt an overwhelming sense of peace, as if they'd gone somewhere beautiful. By October, 2 months after the disappearance, the active investigation wound down. The FBI couldn't maintain that resource deployment indefinitely with no new leads. The command post was dismantled. Agents returned to regular assignments. Harrow filed a report that ran to 847 pages and concluded with the most frustrating words an investigator can write: unable to determine what occurred. The campground remained closed, cordoned off with yellow tape. The Forest Service debated what to do with it. Some wanted to bulldoze everything. Others argued for preservation, insisting future technology might reveal something current investigators had missed. They left it mostly as it was, though personal items were removed and returned to families. The tents gradually sagged under winter snows. Camp chairs rusted. The forest began its patient work of reclaiming the cleared spaces. The families formed a support group that met monthly in Portland. They shared memories, compared notes on their emotional journeys, kept each other afloat when grief threatened to drown them. They held memorial services without bodies, because humans need ritual to process loss. But mostly, they waited. They waited for a phone call that would explain everything. They waited for closure that never came. In the years following the Whispering Pines disappearance, countless theories emerged to explain the inexplicable. The most conventional theory suggested coordinated kidnapping by a sophisticated criminal organization. Perhaps a human trafficking ring had somehow subdued everyone simultaneously through contaminated food or water, then transported them to a secondary location. The FBI investigated extensively, tracking every known trafficking operation in the Pacific Northwest. The theory collapsed under logistical impossibility. You can't transport 66 unconscious people without leaving tire tracks, without being seen, without vehicles that would themselves leave evidence. The Forest Service Road was dirt and gravel. Significant traffic would have left obvious marks. None were found. Carl Dietrich. The logger who'd driven past Sunday morning would have encountered any convoy. He saw nothing. Environmental poisoning offered another angle. Perhaps something in the local ecosystem, a gas leak, fungal spore, natural toxin, had caused mass hallucination or compelled everyone to walk away in an altered state. The EPA conducted extensive environmental testing: water, soil, air. Mycologists examined local fungi. They checked for radon, carbon monoxide, exotic chemicals. Everything came back normal. Whatever happened, it wasn't environmental. The underground shelter theory gained traction in some circles. Perhaps the campground sat atop an old military facility, and everyone had fallen through a collapsed section into a hidden complex. The USGS and Army Corps of Engineers reviewed geological surveys and military records. They brought ground-penetrating radar. There was nothing there. No caverns, no bunkers, no underground spaces. The bedrock was solid. Cult involvement became popular, particularly after several high-profile cases in the 1980s. But investigations into every known cult operating in the region came up empty. The missing people showed no previous connection to cult activity, no vulnerability factors, no signs of having been contacted by cult members before their trip. The rapture theory, proposed by some religious groups, suggested this was a divine event, that these particular people had been chosen by God and taken directly to heaven. Jennifer Chen found some comfort in this idea, though it raised uncomfortable questions about why these specific 66 people were chosen. From an investigative standpoint, the theory was useless. You can't investigate divine intervention. The extraterrestrial hypothesis became unavoidable, particularly after the UFO research community took interest. They pointed to the dog's confused behavior, the complete lack of physical evidence, and the simultaneous disappearance as hallmarks of alien abduction events. Several witnesses came forward claiming unusual lights that Saturday night, though none of these reports were contemporaneous. They all emerged after media coverage began. Travis Walton, whose own alleged 1975 alien abduction had made headlines, traveled to Whispering Pines and declared it consistent with extraterrestrial contact. The FBI politely declined his offer to assist. Harrow admitted to colleagues that the UFO theory was at least internally consistent. If you accepted technologically advanced aliens capable of interstellar travel, then simultaneously removing 66 people without leaving evidence was theoretically possible. But accepting that premise required abandoning every investigative principle she'd built her career on. The time slip theory emerged from fringe researchers, suggesting some temporal anomaly had occurred, that the campground had somehow shifted into a different time frame or dimension. This explained why dogs couldn't track scents, and why no evidence of departure existed. It had the disadvantage of being completely unprovable and requiring physics that didn't exist in any accepted scientific framework. Local folklore offered its own explanations. Native American tribes who'd originally inhabited the region had stories about places where the veil between worlds grew thin, where spirits could pull the unwary into other realms. Some elders noted the area around Whispering Pines had traditionally been avoided during certain times of year. These stories were treated with respect, but couldn't be incorporated into a criminal investigation. By the early 1990s, the case had effectively gone cold. The file sat in archives, occasionally pulled out when a new agent wanted a fresh look or when a tip came in. The consensus, to the extent any existed, was that they were dealing with either an unprecedented criminal conspiracy executed with perfection or something so far outside normal experience that current investigative methods couldn't comprehend it. Neither option was satisfying. Standing at the edge of what used to be Whispering Pines Campground last summer, 40 years after 66 people vanished, I tried to imagine that final night. The forest had reclaimed almost everything. Saplings grew where tents once stood. Thick carpet of needles covered old gravel roads, and the creek still sang its endless song. But something about the place still felt wrong. Over the decades, dozens of visitors have reported the same inexplicable unease, a sense of being watched, of standing at the threshold of something they couldn't quite perceive. Park rangers admit, usually off the record, that they hurry through this valley. Local hikers avoid it. Even wildlife seems less abundant here, though no ecological study has identified a reason why. The families never stopped searching. In 2015, on the 30th anniversary, they pooled resources to hire researchers to review every piece of evidence using modern forensic techniques: DNA analysis, digital reconstruction, advanced geological surveys, everything unavailable in 1985. The researchers found nothing new. The mystery remained impenetrable. James Morrison died in 2019 at 73, having spent 34 years living with survivors' guilt and unanswered questions. His obituary mentioned his teaching career, his community dedication, his advocacy for missing persons. It didn't need to mention Whispering Pines. Everyone who knew him knew that was the defining tragedy of his life. In his final years, Morrison gave several interviews about that Sunday morning. His memory never wavered, never became embellished. He could still describe exactly where each item had been placed, could still hear the unnatural silence, could still feel the panic rising in his chest. "Sometimes I think it would have been easier if I'd been with them," he said months before his death. Not knowing is its own kind of hell. Are they dead? Did they suffer? Are they somewhere else, wondering why no one came to find them? I've spent most of my life in that uncertainty, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Sarah Cordova, now in her 50s, and still investigating cold cases, has become an expert on the Whispering Pines disappearance. She's reviewed the FBI files so many times she can recite sections from memory. She's interviewed every living person connected to the case. She's explored every theory, no matter how unlikely. The hardest part, she told me last year, is that there's no story I can tell myself that makes sense. Every explanation requires me to believe something that seems impossible: mass kidnapping without evidence, environmental poisoning that left no trace, supernatural intervention, time anomalies. None of it fits with the world as I understand it, but something happened, and 66 people ceased to exist in our reality. So one of those impossible things must somehow be true. The FBI officially maintains the case as an active cold case, though no agents are currently assigned full-time. The evidence remains in climate-controlled storage in Portland. The case file is sometimes used in training scenarios, an example of how even the most meticulous investigation can fail when confronted with truly anomalous circumstances. In recent years, internet sleuths and true crime podcasters have rediscovered the case, bringing new attention. Online forums debate theories. Amateur investigators make pilgrimages to the former site, and each anniversary brings fresh speculation. Some attention has been helpful. Much has been painful for families who must relive their trauma with each viral thread. What happened at Whispering Pines Campground in August 1985? The honest answer is that we don't know. We may never know. 66 people walked into those woods and simply ceased to be, leaving behind everything except themselves and any answers we might use to understand their fate. The case stands as a reminder of how much we don't know about the world we inhabit. We like to think we've charted every corner of reality, that we understand the rules governing what's possible. But Whispering Pines suggests there are still edges to our map, still phenomena that escape our ability to comprehend. For the families still waiting for closure, that's cold comfort. They don't need philosophical observations about the limits of human knowledge. They need their loved ones back, or at least to know what happened to them. They need the kind of ending that allows grief to complete its work instead of remaining suspended in eternal uncertainty. Perhaps someday, someone will stumble onto the missing piece, the overlooked clue, the suppressed memory, the technological breakthrough that reveals what happened during those 11 hours. Perhaps the forest itself will finally yield its secrets. Until then, Whispering Pines remains what it has always been, a cautionary tale about the boundaries of our understanding, a tragedy without resolution, and a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying mysteries aren't the ones where something monstrous is revealed, but the ones where nothing is revealed at all. The families continue to wait. The forest continues to whisper. And somewhere in the vast web of causation connecting every event in our universe, there's an answer to what happened that August night in 1985. We just haven't found it yet.